Guys, Johnny Merryman here. We decided to start a YouTube page, and I thought it'd be good to let you guys know who you're even watching right now. Thought I'd throw my testimony up here because I spent a lot of time putting it together, and I never read it for my youth group, so I thought now would be a good time to do it. I never read it because I kind of feel like nobody wants to hear this crap. It's just a long story about small things that I've been through, nothing serious, and just how I ended up coming to Christ, which is the main part. So I got it all nice and typed up. I never read it, like I said. It's been through thick and thin just to even still be here. So I think I'm just gonna read how it is, and I hope somebody out there will feel touched by it. My name is Johnny Merryman, 20 years old, and I'm a soldier for the man that bore my iniquities on the cross. I live in Mostot, which is irrelevant, but yeah, put it on there. Just want to start saying when I was born in Belleville. I lived there till I was 2 years old. And when I was 2 years old, I fell down a bunch of stairs, and I was in this little baby bouncer thing. And the top rack thing saved my life, which, in a way, you could just say maybe God kind of wrapped his hands around me, kept me alive through that. Because when my mom said all I had was a bruise on my forehead, and I wasn't crying, didn't have nothing broken, just a bruise, and I was kind of laughing. So from that point on, you can almost tell God loved me and cared for me, you know. I grew up in Tokyo, 10 years. It actually isn't that bad of a neighborhood. Everybody acts like it's the most ghetto place in Illinois. Nothing's compared to Chicago, Compton, and all those places, like St. Louis, Washington Park. But it is pretty rough down there. I had a lot of bikes stolen, things broken into. I got bullied a lot. I was never like beat up or nothing like that, but I was always mentally made fun of, mentally abused, kind of pushed around. I had a lot of people tell me they were gonna jump me and stuff like that. And luckily it never happened, but it was always just that fear living as a little kid. Always being scared of, am I gonna get beat up today? Is my bike gonna be stolen by the time I get home? Is somebody gonna bust in my window, break in my house tonight? You never know what's gonna happen. So it wasn't very nice living down there, and I lived down there for 10 years. I was almost abducted, like a child abduction type thing. I didn't really have any friends. I sat by myself at lunch all the time in recess. I had one friend, but he was kind of one of those. He kind of beat me up every now and then, hit me and slapped me a lot. Never anything to where I had to go to the hospital. But he was pretty rough dude. Putting all that together, about the age of 8, I started thinking, what if I could just kill myself? I didn't know what happened when you died. I thought you just died and it'd be over with. So I remembered I was always ask my parents, what's the easiest way to kill yourself? What's the least painful way to kill yourself? I would ask them how it feels to get stabbed in the stomach, like forks and knives, and stuff like that. I wanted to do it however I could, any way I could, just not have to deal with crap anymore. But if I look back, it's like, what did I seriously have to worry about that big? But yeah, I can legitimately say that around the age of 8, 9 years old, I was wanting to kill myself, and I was wanting to do it just about any way I could. So from an early age, I never had the fight and the will to live. I was never happy. Still to this day, I don't always feel happy, but you just kind of deal with crap. I was one of those kids that always liked to burn things. I always liked to set toys on fire and watch anything melt. My dad told me one time, he came walking in the kitchen, and I was sitting in a chair watching a bowl of pennies and screws. It was in a butter bowl. I had like pennies, screws, all kinds of little metal crap, paper clips, just a junk bowl on top of the microwave. I had it sitting in the microwave on high, melting the microwave to the ground. And my dad came in, and he said I was sitting there on a chair watching it. So from the early age, I was pyro, I was suicidal, I hated my life, and all those things together just kind of probably built up so that way I ended up with the future that I did have. But it's awesome because it paid off nowadays. I was like 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, when I was baptized, and I was going to a church with my mom and my dad, and Lewis came with us every now and then. Some of you guys know Lewis. If you don't, that's my friend who I've been friends with since I was like 2 years old. So now it's been like 17 years, 17, 18 years or so. We were all going to church together, and I remember getting baptized, but I had no idea what it was about. I just knew that I was getting wet. My parents were extremely happy. Everybody else was applauding, and everybody was happy. And it did have some benefits. I did learn who God was. Around that age, I memorized John 3:16, which everybody has that memorized. Not everybody, obviously, but every Christian that's really getting into it, reading the Bible, has that memorized. So that's nothing special. But yeah, about the age of 8, I remember always praying to God, talking to Him. I knew He existed, and I always kind of seeked after Him, but I didn't understand what it meant to be a follower. I was just a guy that knew who God was, and it didn't really pay off much for me. So I never had that relationship. I wasn't raised into a church family. My dad is sex, drugs, and rock and roll for life. He was the one that got me into God stuff, but he's not exactly like completely all in, I guess you could say. Back in those days, I always walked in my mom and dad smoking weed, drinking, passed out on the floor, friends knocking stuff over, being loud, partying, arguing while I was trying to go to bed, stuff like that. So I know firsthand that what it's like to be raised in a secular home. I wasn't raised in homes to the point where people were getting beat, crazy things were happening. But I remember the partying, Led Zeppelin playing loud, AC/DC, the Coke tray, and the weed being passed around, smelling it. Didn't know what it was, but I smelled it. Now I know what it smells like. And I remember walking in, my mom and dad, one of them being passed out on the kitchen floor drunk. So yeah, I knew all that, and so I didn't know what it was like to be a Christian from an early age. I just knew God existed. And that's where it starts. So being like a loner in school, I always wanted just to have friends because I wanted to know what it was like to have a group of friends to hang out with and stuff. And I had a friend who still lives in Coke today in the neighborhood that I used to hang out, and we started smoking weed. And it was in 4th grade, so I guess I was like 10. I don't know. I don't want to do the math. But I was like 10, 9 or 10 or so, I'd say. And we'd go to my buddy's house, and we'd use a little joint roller and roll up a whole bunch of joints, pass them around, and I'd be sitting there passing them around, and the next thing I know, I'm so high that I can't move. And this was like 10 years old, and it led to just doing it every single day, pretty much. And by the time when I was 12, I lived in Colombia, and I was um, smoking weed like all the time, like every week. I smoked my first blunt when I was 12, which for now people nowadays that ain't nothing. Back in the days, wasn't very common, I guess you could say. I remember when I was high one time smoking weed, I picked up a cigarette off my mom's and I hit it. I took a couple drags off of it and was instantly like addicted to how good I felt when I hit it. So ever since then, I started smoking cigarettes, and eventually, I asked my mom if she could buy me a pack, and so I wouldn't have to keep stealing hers. And she just kept saying no for a while, and then eventually she bought me a pack. And it was actually about 9 years old when I smoked my first joint with her, and that led up to me smoking weed all the time. But I didn't know if I wanted to throw that in there. I don't want to have my mom a bad reputation as the person that got me started. But yeah, my first time was smoking weed with her. I had a lot of great memories while I was in Tokyo. They weren't always great, but I remember before I really started smoking, when I just said about I took a couple drags off my mom, that was my first time actually inhaling off a cigarette. But I remember when I was younger, I had this dude, and we'd roll up piece of paper into the shape of a cigarette, smoke those. We just didn't know. We just seen my parents do it, thought it was cool, so we tried it. But I remember I would dump gasoline. I was a huge gasoline fan. Like one time I dumped gasoline. Jason asked me to, but I dumped gasoline down my little brother's back, and I set him on fire, and kind of laughed while he stopped, dropped, and rolled, and then he got up and left, so it was all right. But I was one of those huge pyro kids, burning things, anything that was flammable. And if it wasn't flammable, gasoline is flammable, so I would soak it with gasoline. But I would dump gasoline on something, and then I would light a piece of paper off my mom's stove, because it was a fire stove. I'd run the piece of paper out, I'd light the fire, and then I would take a little cigarette butt, a little bitty guy, and I would light it off the fire. And I would take it out, I'd put out the fire, I'd take a couple hits off the cigarette, and then that's how I would light my cigarettes. And I wasn't inhaling, I was just doing that all the time. I did have one friend outside of school besides Lewis. Lewis lived not too far away from where I lived. Well, when I say not too far away, I mean like across my backyard, across his backyard, then another his yard. He had two, like a lot in a yard, you know. Um, I had one friend that lived next door to him that I hung out with most of the time, and he was like one of my best friends besides Lewis at the time. And he would come down and like he would talk to me through my window, and we would dump out all my toys, just play with a bunch of stuff. And I was really cool with him until one time him and his friend were drunk, and I'm not positive what the entire story is. I've heard different stories, but all I know is he was drunk and he committed suicide. From what I hear, either he committed suicide or his friend was drunk and put a gun to his head, joking around, and pulled the trigger and killed him. Either way, he's not around today. And I remember I cried that morning for the first time of crying about somebody that I had lost to death. And there was plenty to come, but that was the first time I ever remember crying. Um, so for that reason, I always looked at alcohol really bad. I just didn't have any kind of desire for alcohol. And I also didn't like it because the guy that my mom had dated, which she's coming later in a couple minutes. And I also didn't like it because I always watched my mom and dad get drunk and be so stupid that they wouldn't know what they were doing. I just couldn't stand it. I just didn't like drugs, alcohol at that age. And then of course, I get into smoking weed, which is something I guess because I watched my parents do it all the time. But anyway, when I was about 10 years old, my mom and dad got divorced, and like any other kid, I thought it was my fault, but that's not that big of a deal, really. That's common. That's really common. And I remember crying that day while my dad was sitting in the chair telling us what was going on. And before that, I actually remember going with my dad somewhere. He didn't tell me where we were going. I just remember walking into this building in Tokyo, and I was sitting there talking, just messing around with Jason and stuff. And I didn't know what it meant back then, but I heard him talking to the guy over the counter about getting divorce papers and stuff like that. And I remember thinking about it, like, what does that mean? And eventually, yeah, they got divorced. I was about 10 years old. And as a matter of fact, the day he left, he gave me this really big stuffed bear that was like the size of me back then. And I still have that today. Kind of just one of those things that means a lot to me. And anyway, he moved out to Shiloh, and I stayed with my mom. And during this time, my mom became my life. We did everything together. We talked together. And, she was like my superhero, you know. And we smoked weed a little bit every now and then. Because I mean, when you smoke weed, it's not that big of a deal. But once you get off of it, you realize it is. And my computer's freaking out. Sorry, guys. But my mom was just like everything, you know. I love my mom. I was super happy to be able to stay with her, and I was glad I got to. And I remember sometimes I would skate like half a mile up to her work so I could see her. And she always had like fun things for us to do in the morning when we woke up. Like there was just we'd wake up and there'd be a note and it would leave little like hints to get the thing to find things that would lead to other things like a treasure map. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. And yeah, my mom always had something cool for us to do. I mean, my mom was awesome. Like you couldn't ask for any better mom. She always had something awesome to say. She always had a way of making you feel loved, and I became attached to that because I didn't have a dad, you know, so I didn't grow up getting my fingers greasy in the car grease, and I didn't ride dirt bikes and all that kind of cool stuff that a lot of you guys get to. But I did learn what it was like to have emotions and love and all that kind of stuff, which I guess kind of paid off today. I wish I would have got to ride dirt bikes and learn how to work on cars and stuff. My day will come. I don't need all that junk. But anyway, loved spending a lot of time with her, and we lived in that house till I was about 12 years old, and the house ended up getting demolished because it was literally falling apart. And we moved to Columbia to this apartment, and it was a pretty small apartment, but it still had enough room for all of us. It was just me, my little brother, and my mom. And over this time, I really started smoking weed. I smoked a lot, and I was in 6th grade. I started. It was weird because I went from Cahokia, which Cahokia schools. You can even ask my friend. Cahokia schools suck. No offense to anybody if you're watching this and you go to Cahokia, but your school district, in reality, doesn't have a very good high education level. There's smart people down there, but when it comes to the school that I went to in my time, the education level was pretty low. And I went straight from that, and I went from being, I was only like, there was like 4 or 5 white kids in my entire school. I was one, so there was another like 300 black kids or something, and I went from being used to that, being used to a ghetto school and being picked on and all the time, all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden, boom, now I'm in Columbia, and it's all white people, and people are like, they talk to me, and they ask me questions and how I am and stuff like that, and I just wasn't used to it. Nobody really cared when I was at school and stuff, and I started having friends, and I always wasn't used to being around all these white people, but I liked it, so I kind of liked Columbia, but I was different from the people there. Like generally people in Columbia, they grow up really happy, and they grow up with a family, and they sit down every night, eat dinner at 6 o'clock, and do their homework before they go to bed. And I never had that, so it was different for me. I didn't feel like I fit in, but I tried to make as many friends as I could. But outside of that, I was still smoking weed, so I never really cared about school as much as I should have. And my friends at school were just people that I talked to. And during this time, I was like I said, I was always talking to God. I believed in God. I told others about God. I remember people in 6th grade, this kid always used the Lord's name in vain. It drove me crazy. I'd be like, dude, don't say that. And I didn't know. Wasn't able to explain why you shouldn't say that, but I just remember always telling him to say that. And I always had that feeling in my gut, like maybe there's more than I'm not realizing about this God thing. But I kept smoking weed all the time. But weed was just my thing back then. I've been pothead for 8 years before I finally quit last year. But I was held back in my 6th grade year, and it's mostly because I was either smoking weed or listening to music instead of doing my homework. And I was skating. I started skating when I was 6 years old, so I skated all the time. If I wasn't skating, I was smoking weed. If I wasn't doing that, I was listening to music. If I wasn't doing that, then I was just hanging out with my mom. I mean, I was doing anything besides school stuff. School was the last thing on my mind, and I just, I don't know, I wasn't very interested, and we ended up getting kicked out of the place out there in Columbia, Lived over on Warren Rock back behind Ace Hardware, for those of you who know where that's at. We got kicked out because they changed the place into a old people's place, uh, senior citizen type place. So my mom went to stay with her boyfriend at the time, and me and my little brother went to stay with my grandma. And that was another huge change. I went from not doing my homework, being able to do just about whatever I wanted, to being with my grandma. Well, I love you, grandma, if you're watching this. But it was a big change for me. I had to. She always had me doing my homework, and I didn't like that. And I wasn't allowed. I couldn't just walk down the street to my friend's house. I couldn't do anything I wanted. You know, it was different for me. So it kind of whipped me in shape. It was like a boot camp compared to what I was at. Not literally. It wasn't bad or nothing. It's just it was different. Like I started trying with my life, and I was still more worried about smoking weed, but I just I don't know. I had to try a lot harder. I had to do my homework. I had to pay attention to school. That was after I had failed sixth grade, so I was determined to not only pass sixth grade, but to prove to her I can do it, prove to my mom and people around me. I lost a lot of friends, but I also made a lot of friends because of that. Because I failed. If I wouldn't have failed, I wouldn't be friends with some of the people I am today. And it was around this time I got we moved back in with my mom. She'd gotten another apartment, and she started dating this guy, and it was kind of rough. We didn't really like the dude, but they didn't last too long, so it was alright. And we just kind of did our own thing. I got really close to my mom during this time. This was during the Viva La Bam days, so I was still pretty messed up back then. I smoked my first blunt while we lived in this area, so that led me to smoking weed all the time. I remember getting bags from my neighbor downstairs. I just realized with smoking weed it was awesome. You know? I don't glorify that today or gratify that, encourage it in any way, shape, or form. But back then I was like, dude, it was awesome. I'm gonna do this all the time now. So I was always able to get it. But we were out in Ohio one time. It was a little bit after, about halfway by the time we were moving in, or living in this apartment. And we were out in Ohio. And I remember one time I was on the phone with my mom, and all of a sudden I hear tires screeching, and then I hear my mom cuss, and the phone hangs up. So I started freaking out. I was like, what's going on? You know, why is my mom answering the phone? I knew she had gotten hit by a car, but I was nervous. Like, is she alright? Is she gonna make it? And I mean, like I said earlier, my mom was my life, and I was willing to do anything for her, you know. And if she would have died that day, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, my dad was out of the picture for a while doing his thing, and my grandma and grandpa, I didn't want to go live in Ohio. Um, I just wanted my mom, you know, I just wanted my mom to answer the phone. And she eventually answered, and she said she was alright. She had just got hit in the intersection across the street from my house that we lived in. And the phone conversation ended by her getting arrested, saying she had to go. But I was just glad she was okay. But it wasn't. It was another time while we were out in Ohio that she was dating this guy who I still see today, and I still get this blood chilling gut feeling and just horrible memories that brings back. She was dating this guy, and they would argue like all the time, every single night. I'm not kidding you, every single night. And he would get so drunk that he would seriously start breaking things and throwing things and smashing and yelling and cussing. I've heard a lot of arguments in my life, but when it's your mom, when you're hearing her being called every name in the book, the C word, the W word, the B word, everything, useless, worthless, and we're being involved in that, we're getting called, like, and I can't even repeat the things that we've been called, but it was always just rough when that dude was around, and since they would argue so much, like almost every time they argued, they would break up. My mom would be like, I'm done with this guy, I'm never gonna see him again. And he got tired of that, and he started putting antifreeze, like the kind of stuff you use for your car. He started putting that in her drinks, her beer, and her coffee. And she even told me one time that they pulled over, and she threw up neon green stuff. But back to the point, he put that in her coffee and her drinks. And when they would get in an argument, they would fight, and the next day she wouldn't even really remember that it happened. She would just know that they had been arguing, and everything was alright. So it messed up her memory really bad. She would forget everything, and she stopped doing the things that she normally did. She was, she would do the dishes, she would do laundry, she would make sure things were cleaned up, she would cook food. But after she like lost her memory, half crazy almost, it seemed like, and she wouldn't do the same things that she used to do. The day I realized that it happened, I was on the phone with her, and I was telling her, "Yeah, I'll be home Saturday," and she was like, "All right, cool." And then a couple minutes later, she'd be like, "When did you say you're coming home again?" And I was like, Saturday. And she would be like, "Okay." And then she kept asking me over and over again, "What day did you say?" And I eventually just got mad, and I didn't understand what was going on. So I started getting really worried and like confused. And it led to so much stress and pain, them fighting and them getting back together again and all this kind of stuff. And I remember one time I was standing behind the door, and I had one of those metal hose brake things with all the little sharp things on it. And I was hoping that he was going to come walking back in so I could just beat him in the head with it and hopefully, kill him so they wouldn't be getting back together again. I just didn't want to deal with that. I was young. I was suicidal myself, so if I wasn't scared to kill myself, I wasn't worried about killing anybody else. I was more worried about hurting my mom or going to jail. But every time we called the cops on him, he would just leave. And then after the cops came and then he left, he would always come back. So it wouldn't do us no good to call the cops. I thought the only rational way I could get rid of this guy was seriously just bash his head in. And luckily for both of us, he didn't come back that night. But I guess everything kind of worked out in the end. Sometimes, one time the argument got really crazy, and my friend stood up to fight him, and he put up his fist. My buddy will tell you the story today. He put up his fist and told you to stand up, and he wouldn't stand up. He just sat there and got quiet. And then all of a sudden, he said one thing. My mom said one thing. I won't repeat what she said, but she said one thing, and dude freaked out. He slammed his beer on the table and threw it across. He hit this little lamp, and it flew all over my face. And he started like yelling and tackled me through my phone because I was trying to call the cops. And we took the argument out on the porch, and he told my friend, he's like, "So you think you're so big and bad? Let's see who's big and bad now." And he goes out to his truck and comes back with a gun. And my buddy freaked out completely and took off running. I don't know where he went, but I'm guessing he ran 4 or 5 miles all the way back to his house in Cahokia. I was living in Duplo at the time. I forgot to mention that, I think, but uh, we were living in this little trailer, and my friend took off running all the way back to his house. So the rest of the night, we just had to shut up and listen to whatever he had to say and take all this abuse and stuff like that. So it was crazy. I just couldn't deal with that stuff no more. And the only real problems that it had in the long run was I can't help but blame him for some of the things that went on later on. And it just every time I see him now, I can't. It caused me a lot of problems trying to forgive. Part of being a Christian is forgiving the past things that have happened. The Bible says, if there you remember you have something against your brother, go and be reconciled to your brother and come and offer your gift. So out of all the people in my life, he's one of the people that I haven't forgiven. I mean, I've forgiven him, kind of, but I don't think it's in me to completely forgive him yet. Hopefully someday that'll change. Pray on it, if you can. But it was just really rough. One time, the worst thing that like ever happened with him really was we were staying at his house, and he was drunk. My mom was half out of it herself. It was a normal night, perfect mixture of chaos like it always was. Arguments started, words started coming out, started being called everything, things got smashed, um, and he went and he just kind of set his rifle down on the table and wouldn't let us leave. We tried to leave and kept trying to leave and kept trying to leave, and he just wouldn't let us. So we had to just kind of sit on the bed, and me and my little brother and my mom just kind of sat there together, and we couldn't leave, or else who knows what he was going to do. And we ended up uh, waiting for him. He went to go take a little bath, and while he was taking a bath, we took off out the door, got in the car, and went and stayed at a hotel. And while we were gone, he went to our little trailer, kicked in the door, and smashed a bunch of things looking for us. Uh, it wasn't that I don't remember how that night ended. All I know is I stayed at my friend's house and we were scared out of our minds that he was looking for us. He wasn't super abusive, but there's been one or two times where my mom came out of her room with bruises on her face. Actually, my mom being such a cool mom as she is, uh, one time I asked her what had happened. She said that he had hit her, and she said, "But it's alright, I clocked him right back in the jaw." So, um, not awesome that my mom got hit, but it is awesome that my mom stole right back in his face. But anyway, after I don't know how long of being there, we told my landlord all this stuff about us doing drugs. This is when we were smoking weed daily. I mean, I knew how to make my own water bomb. I knew how to roll up my own blunt. I knew how to do everything I needed. He took I don't know how many bags from us. I was getting doves and all that stuff. I'm not glorifying this again. I mean, I'm just saying I knew my stuff back then. I was doing it, and it was a daily thing for me to smoke weed and skate. That was my life. And after like a couple months, he got us kicked out of there because he told my landlord about all the drugs we were doing and stuff. So being in the situation that I've been in before, I lived in Cahokia, and then I moved to Columbia in an apartment. I went from that apartment to my grandma's. I went to another apartment, back to my grandma's, and then to Duplo. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess back to grandma's. But surprisingly, my dad came at the perfect time, and we ended up moving in an apartment with him in Millstadt just before I started 7th grade. I don't remember how old I was. I guess I was like 15 years old. And again, at this time, I was a full-blown pothead, and I was smoking cigarettes and weed daily. And he was like strict because he had missed us, and he was like really wanting to take care of us to make sure nothing happened to us because we had spent I don't know how many years apart. So it was like we had all these rules and stuff that we had to follow that I wasn't used to at all. And I was always trying to smoke weed every day, and I always had these like little abandonment issues and all that little petty stuff. But I eventually got over it. But for the most part, it was really different living with my dad. He would leave to go do his thing, and we would sit there and have friends over and smoke weed. And when I found out he was on his way home, everybody would leave, and I would spray and do whatever I could to cover up the smell. I remember always have to sneak outside to smoke cigarettes or climb, doing anything I could, to work my way around it. I always ended up getting caught, but I was really rebellious back then. One of the problems that really was hard for me back then was while I was living with my dad, enjoying my new life and stuff, my mom was stuck down there living with her boyfriend, the abusive, drunk, hick guy that lived in a trailer the size of my kitchen. And it was just hard for me not knowing what could happen to her at any moment. Even now that I think about it, I have no idea what could have happened to her in those months, or how many times they could have argued, and I would have been able to. I wasn't there to help her and stuff. And I don't want to think about that because that's really hard for me right now. That I just completely first time ever thinking about that. But yeah, it was really hard for me knowing that she lived with her boyfriend by themselves. But sometime around my 8th grade year, they finally broke up for good, and my mom moved back in with us. But I found out that she had had cancer, and she had I can't make it the normal size, but she had half the baseball. like picture a baseball, cut it in half, and that's how big she had a tumor right here on the side of her neck. I guess it was thyroid cancer, and um, it was a surprise. We can only guess that it was from the antifreeze that she was drinking, and either way, I was still really excited because I mean, my mom always used to like rub her fingers through my hair, and we always used to stay awake and talk until one of us fell asleep. And I mean, life was just awesome with my mom. Everything we did together made me happy, whether it was just sitting here or talking, watching movies, anything like that. And I don't know how many times we used to like fall asleep talking just about all kinds of things. And for the first time since I had moved away and left her, I got to experience all this stuff again. So it was really awesome for me. But with her being diagnosed with thyroid cancer, it was insane for me because I mean my mom could die, and that's something that not every teenager wants to go through. That's something no teenager wants to go through. Let me correct myself there. And it's just unbearable thinking about that. And she would always get better, a little better, and then it would get worse. So we never knew what was going to happen. 1 week she was getting better. The doctor's like, yeah, everything's getting better. Cancer's clearing up a little bit. But the next thing you know, she's doing really bad. A couple times I had to call the ambulance myself because she couldn't breathe, stuff like that. And they eventually removed the tumor, and she started doing a little better, a little worse, a little better, and all this stuff. It was always off and on. She was always on potassium and protein drinks because she was really skinny and weak. She couldn't like eat any solid food, and she had lost all her hair because of the chemo and radiation and all that stuff. And it was just I was just always scared about that. She started getting a lot better for the most part, but on a Saturday night, January 24th, we told her we were staying at my grandma's house, and I love you. The last words I said that night before I left. And I went to my grandma's. We stayed the night. We had a pretty cool night. And then I wake up the next morning, eat some breakfast, and I get a phone call from my dad, and it says, "Mom didn't wake up," and it didn't like completely click in my head at first. I was kind of like, what? And then I just remember crying. And I told my grandma, and she cried, and my uncle cried when he got in the shower, and my worst nightmare in my entire life that just came true overnight, and I didn't even get to say goodbye for real. If I'd have known, you always wish you would have known before something happened. You'd always go back and do something different than you did before. Like I'd go back and I'd tell her I loved her with all my heart. I'd tell her that I'm gonna miss her, and just all that kind of stuff. So from that point on, my life had just took a spiral turn, and I was smoking weed daily, more than ever actually, and not too long after, I got drunk for my first time, which I thought I never would. I always said I'd never do alcohol, but I ended up getting very, very, very drunk and waking up on a picnic table outside of town, out on a park, and it just, I had rages of depression, anger, and I just thought about all these things, like she wouldn't be at my wedding, she wouldn't get to meet new girlfriends that I had, she wouldn't get to meet her grandkids, or we wouldn't just get to spend those moments together that I always loved when I was a kid and all this kind of stuff. So it just really sucked, dude. I mean, I don't know if you guys have lost your mom or lost anybody like that's that close to you. Maybe you've lost your grandma, or maybe you've lost somebody like that. But I can promise you that until you lose somebody that meant more to you than life itself, you won't understand. But I'm not here to brag about that or to talk anything about that. I'm just here to say that it was really hard for me in my life, and I was still suicidal. I was suicidal for a good 6, 7 years before that finally happened. So when that happened, I mean, at that point I was just like, well, screw it, dude. I mean, what else do I have to do? So this was sometime around my freshman year, I stopped caring about school. I remember always sitting in class with my head down while everybody was doing their thing, and I would just look around at the people, the happy people. They were going to go home to their moms and dads and eat dinner and all that kind of good stuff. And I just remember being jealous a lot and just missing that feeling of being able to see your parents when you get home, asking all that stuff. But I stopped caring about school, and I got super far behind, and I started drinking a lot more. I smoked weed a lot more. I started doing experimental drugs. When I was on my 16th birthday, uh, I don't know if you know the difference between experimental acid and just normal clean acid, but experimental acid is really strong and unsafe. Um, that was my first time doing it. I ate like 3 hits of it, and I was fried out for like 3 days. I'm not here to glorify that again, but that just led to me doing everything. I mean, I started doing acid every month, a couple times a month. I started eating shrooms, started doing ecstasy. I started doing pills that I don't even know how to pronounce. I started snorting things, Xanax all the time, Xanax bars. I was drinking. I started mixing things together. Like one time I ate acid, smoked a bunch of weed. I downed a bunch of vodka and inhaled a can of air duster. So I started mixing things to see which would do what, like opium and weed and pills, and getting drunk, like shrooms, Molly, which is 100% ecstasy, and getting drunk and all that kind of stuff. I'm not glorifying that. I never will. This entire video, I want to let you know I'm not glorifying or condoning anything that I did. It's all just to let you know what I did and just part of my testimony. It's just this was my life back then. I was smoking weed, I was doing drugs, popping pills, drinking, and I just stopped caring about life itself. I was smoking weed all day, every day, always had weed on me. And after my 18th birthday, I got caught with a pipe. I was smoking weed. It didn't even have any weed in it. It just had resin, had dust, stuff like that in it. And I ended up staying in Heighton St. Clair jail out here where I live. And I remember I walked in and it was dark in there, but all I seen was like 4 or 5 big black dudes, and my 5'4" little white butt walking in, scared, holding a little mat they give you to lie on. And I think it's kind of funny that I was so scared because I have a God that's bigger than any problem in my life. But yeah, I was scared that night. And during this time, I forgot to mention I was really seeking God. I started playing guitar. Since when I moved here, I was playing guitar. So I've only been playing for about 5 years. Today, I've only been playing for about 5 years. But guitar became my thing, and I started wishing that I could do more with it. I didn't just want to be a band. I wanted to be a band for God. And I started like learning God's word. My dad started telling us little things, and it was weird. My dad would start talking about God, and I'd be like, "Oh, there he goes again." And I just didn't want to hear it. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. But it's all good that it happened. I'm glad that it happened. Um, but after my sophomore or junior year, I don't remember when it was. Um, I don't know if you guys know anything about synthetic marijuana, but it's depending on what you get. Some is synthetic meth, some is synthetic, like, some is just synthetic weed, like K2 and all that kind of stuff. You hear about that stuff's junk, and I never spent any more money on that. I wouldn't never waste my money on that stuff. But the stuff that I was smoking was Mad Hatter. It was synthetic heroin, and it had all the effects of heroin without being sold on the streets, and you got way more for your money. I'm talking like way more for your money. And you would smoke it, and it would make you nod out and pass out, and it was like highly addictive, just as addictive as heroin, just about. Maybe not as bad, but it was pretty bad. I was smoking Mad Hatter and Primo. I know you guys probably have no idea what that is. Some of you might, but that was like my stuff. I smoked. It was $20 a bag, so I was always having some. It was extremely dangerous though. I looked it up, and poison control last year got 6,959 calls because people were either dying on it or they were overdosed. They were overdosing and had to be like pumped, their stomach pumped, whatever. I don't know how you do it, but people were just going crazy. People were calling. That's I guess that also includes people that just didn't know what was happening to them and called the cops. Man had to go to the hospital, but either way, they got a 7,000 calls. Poison control did, and that's also parents coming home to their children like twitching out. I've watched people have seizures on this stuff. I've seen multiple people throw up. Myself, I had paranoid schizophrenia for about 2 years, and this stuff was just no joke, dude. I'm telling you. And I was hooked on it like instantly. It was my meth, my crack, my heroin. I loved it, and I started selling everything I had. I lost pretty much all my guitars. I've sold 2 Xbox 360s for it. I sold controllers, video games, cameras, my skateboards. Um, my dad still doesn't know about this, and I'm extremely guilty and need to fix this with him. But I've stolen things from my dad, video games, and sold things and pawned things just to get the money for it. And when I had it, I was all right. Life was pretty sweet. But then when I didn't have it, the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and the guilt. I think it was God calling out to my conscience, and I was more suicidal than I've ever been in my life. Like I don't know if there's levels of suicide, but trust me, dude, I was on the last level. Like the oh my gosh, I'm just gonna freaking do it level. And I started asking people if I could borrow guns. I asked one guy if he could put a hit on somebody, and he was gonna do it himself until he found out that the hit was on me. And I tried smoking myself, like overdosing on smoking myself, and unfortunately it never worked. I just woke up like a couple hours later in the same position that I fell asleep in. I just couldn't do anything to kill myself. I tried so hard, and like it was just like God had a better purpose for me. I didn't know back then, but that's was my purpose. And it felt like I was. I started coughing up and hacking up yellow and black stuff from my throat. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were bleeding. Even today, I think from it, my insides feel like they're just rotting away. I just felt like I was dying, literally. My eyes were sunk in, my cheeks were sunk in. I was like 95 pounds. I looked like a crackhead, bro. I'm not gonna lie. I had big black circles around my eyes every sometimes, and I would smoke all day until I passed out in my chair, and I would wake up and smoke some more until I passed out, wake up, smoke, and then I would run out and I'd freak out and I'd have to figure out how to get some more, and if I didn't get more, I would start sweating and I would start getting withdrawals, and I just had to do anything I could. I would bum money. I was losing all my family and all my friends, and even today, I think I have prostate problems from it. Probably like in my appendix area, it feels like it's gonna bust every now and then, and I still like hack stuff up every now and then. And this was almost 8 months ago that I was doing this stuff. Since the last time I did this stuff, so even today, I still feel death floating in my body. Uh, I just couldn't concentrate. I couldn't eat. I was losing weight. The only time I could eat was when I smoked. I couldn't sleep without it. If I didn't have it, I was up till 4 in the morning. And when I did have it, the only reason I did sleep was because I would smoke myself to sleep. And then every 2 or 3 hours, I'd wake up and smoke myself back to sleep. So that was just my way of life. I was hooked, and I couldn't get off. It ran my life. It controlled my life. It made me suicidal, and it made me just hate everything. And I cried so many times at night because I just wanted to be free. And all the experience that I'd really started getting. I was really close to God at this point, but I still wasn't a follower. And I just always had wished if there was something I could do to get off this stuff, you know. Um, I cried out to God many times, and since I became like more of a Christian, I wanted to mix my music with God, and I wanted to combine the two. And I always wanted to play music for God and go around. And I had a heart for evangelism, it's really hypocritical of me back in that day because I was doing all these drugs and partying and all this stuff, but I was telling people about God at the same time. But um, I always just wanted to do something more with my life, and I just wanted to get off that stuff. I had eventually stopped smoking weed because weed was a waste of my time and money because I just enjoyed this stuff so much more. And I was literally I was smoking every single day, all day long. If I didn't have it, I was trying to get it. If I was trying to get it, I eventually did get it, and I would smoke that entire day until I just fell asleep, and it just repeated a cycle. And it feels like I thought it was only like 1 year of this stuff, and people would tell me that it was like 2 years that I was doing this stuff. So most of my life was like a dream back then. I just always remember crying out to God, and I had this girlfriend, and when I first met her, she was cutting herself. She was kind of suicidal like me, so we fit together, it's how well. But being the evangelistic heart that I have even today, I eventually brought her to get God, kind of up to where I was, I was still up above, but I started bringing her to God, and she started going to church. She started bringing her friends to church, and it was just awesome. We started living this godly-ish relationship. I say godly-ish because we were still having sex, we were still doing things that we should have been doing, but we talked about God all the time. I mean, we were able to have conversations about God and how awesome He is, but at the same time, I was still smoking, doing drugs. She wasn't doing anything, but I was doing all these hard drugs and stuff. And we were like somewhat perfect for each other, and it lasted for like 2 years and 3 months. And then she started talking to my best friend behind my back. And at this point, I was the lowest I had ever been in my entire life. I couldn't have been any more suicidal than I was. I just, every day, I even lost joy in her. I wasn't taking things seriously. I didn't find joy in anything that I did. And she was always telling me, hey, you just need to stop smoking. And I would cry and I would say, I want to, and I just wish I could, and I just can't. And eventually, I guess she had had enough of it and started talking to my best friend, not the ones I've been talking about in this video, a different one, but became my best friend later on in the years. And she ended up leaving me for this guy, and they're still together today. And I've forgiven him for that, and I'm actually very thankful because after she had left me for this dude, um, I that's when I had hit rock bottom in my life. I was the lowest point, and instead of wanting to kill myself and going through with it, I found strength in my pain, in my misery. It turned more into motivation. My tears became like just the desire to change who I was. I wanted to be who she always wanted me to be, and then eventually started to become who I always wanted to be, and then eventually I started to want to become who God wanted me to be. I'd been crying out to Him every single day for 2 years, just wishing that I could change my life. I was a hardcore drug addict. I miss my mom. I still do. I was a high school dropout. I had no car. I had no job. I had nothing. My whole life was a pointless spiral of just junk. Every day was the same. And I had all this rage, and it just turned into motivation. I wanted to get sober, and I wanted to live God's will, and slowly things started to change. And one night I just decided I had enough. After a lot of praying, I went to a CR recovery group on Tuesday nights, which we have up there at my church that I go to. And on that night, Tuesday night, August 14th, I was high when I came. I smoked right before I showed up. But that night, I heard people talking about loving God, and one of my buddies, who I'm good friends with now today, was trying to stop smoking weed, and he was talking about just how awesome it is to be sober, and how close it is nice to be close to God and stuff. And I heard another guy just talking about things. And I had wanted it so bad that maybe my desire and the motivation I got from these people, it just I just hit me. This was my goal in my life right now, was to get sober and never touch drugs again. And that night, I finished the rest of my bag, and I just begged. I begged God. I had been begging God for I don't know how long, but this time I begged with everything I had in me. I didn't have a lot left in me, but I begged with whatever I had. And I woke up and 3 days went by, and it was three of the hardest days of my entire life. But all glory be to our Father, our merciful Father that's in heaven. I made it through it, and now I'm not too far past 7 months of sobriety. It's coming up on today is March 27th, I think. Yeah, March 27th. So on April 14th, I'll be 8 months clean, and that's all because God is good. God is amazing. He does things that we don't deserve, and things that we never expect. He works in ways that we can't understand all the time. So sometimes we gotta go through pain and we gotta go through motivation. My worst breakup in my entire life, my most painful breakup, turned into the most motivating thing that's ever happened to me in my life, and it's why I'm still here today. If that wouldn't have happened, if she wouldn't have left me, maybe I would have ended up just killing myself. I had no reason, no will to live. All those times that I had spent wanting to do things, it finally happened now because I had hit rock bottom. So if you guys hit rock bottom, that's awesome because that's God reaching out to you in ways that you can't understand at the moment. I got my GED, I got a car, and I brought as many friends as I could to Christ as I could, and one of them actually got sober. It didn't last very long, but now as he's not doing as much as he used to. I started reading God's Word every day, and within like 2 weeks, I finished three of the four Gospels: um, Matthew, John, and Mark. I finished those three Gospels in like 2 weeks. I just seriously just read every day, uh, and I started getting more involved in Sunday. I had other friends with me that really wanted to go to church with me, so I started going with them and started bringing as many people as I could. And I used to sit in the back row, stoned out of my mind, and eventually I started sitting in the front row because it was easier for me to shut everybody out and focus on the pastor and learn the sermon instead of worrying about whose head's in front of me and who's sitting up there in front of me. But I started going to the Sunday sermons, and then eventually I started going to like Fuel, which is our Wednesday night group. I started going to cribs on Sunday nights, so I had Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night, all filled with things. Um, Eventually, October 28th, I got baptized into Christ, and along with a few good friends, I rededicated my life to God. Um, James 20 says, "Let him know that he which converteth a sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and hide a multitude of sins." If you help change a man from sin, you can save his soul from death. And that became my life right there. I set my heart on becoming an evangelistic Christian, not just to sit at home. Yeah, I'm a Christian. No, I'm a freaking Christian, and I'm going to show others through my testimony that God is good, God saves, even when his voice is still. You can always trace his hands. I don't know how that saying goes, but it's something like that. And since all this, I've rededicated my life. I'm now a soldier for Christ, and I recruit anybody that will listen. I can guarantee there's a handful of people out here that will tell you I talk too much about God. That's okay because some people grow up in the church, other people are brought down to their knees in the church, and I was one of those people that hadn't hit rock bottom, and I had to go through a lot of experiences just to find my faith completely. Um, you'll see, um, God started really working in my life. I was able to forgive the girl that had left me. As a matter of fact, I thanked her, and I've forgiven the guy that was part of it, the reason that she left me. And to this day, I still thank you guys. If you guys are watching this, thank you because I would not be the man that I am today in Christ. if you guys wouldn't have done me dirty, and I've patched my heart, and since then I've had feelings for other girls, so I got over that mess. Um, I started playing music a lot more when I was at one of the lowest points in my life with that girl. I was always telling her how I wanted to play music for God. I wanted to go around spreading His word, and how I always told her about how I felt like God was not listening to me. Felt like He was never gonna help me out because I had prayed so long and so much. But I didn't have the right heart for it. That's why I know I didn't get help today. But once I had that right heart and I truly saw it in Him out, I just know that that's why He pulled me out of it. But I was always I was waiting, and I just never believed that God was actually going to help me. And then once I believed that He could help me, uh, that's when it finally happened. But during this point in my life when I was really low, the girl I was with had read me Psalms 40, verse 1 through 3, and it says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined unto me, and He heard my cry. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, and out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And He hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise to our God. And many shall hear it and fear, and trust in the Lord. And that explained my life. I could phrase by phrase explain how that's my life. I always wanted to be a singer and songwriter for God. And one of the last lines, He put a new song in my mouth. Now, since it's after midnight when I'm making this, I've been off cigarettes for 2 weeks and 3 days, and I've been trying to glorify God through this, and luckily I have been. But God has also been blessing my voice. He's been blessing my way of life now. I have energy. I feel alive again. And the main point of all this was just to tell people my story. I hope somebody out there actually watched this whole video because it's really long. And I spent an hour of my life sitting here telling you guys this. So I really hope that somebody paid attention because I'm not doing this again. I'm not going to read this at my youth group because nobody wants to hear this crap. And I just thank God for the mercy that He showed me. Because while I was still yet a sinner, His Son still died for me. While I was as good as dust, while I was as good as the dirt that we walk on, He died for my sins He knew I was going to commit. And He gave me a second chance at life. And my Father loved me so much that He called out to me every single day. And so I finally had no other choice but to acknowledge His will. And just acknowledge that He loved me and had a better plan for me. Today I've completely changed my life from those days. At church almost every time I get the chance to. I'm motivated and I want to do things for God. I want to work in a food pantry. I like to help people. Um, I like to bring people to Christ. My dream right now is to um, take evangelism classes. We just had our Dare to Share event, so that was really awesome for me. And my goal right now is to play music for God. I have a couple songs that I've written, nothing special, but it's not about the music, it's about worshiping God in all that we do. So I'm hoping someday He'll bless me and let me become a singer and songwriter. And eventually someday, once I know the Bible well enough, I'm going to become a preacher. And I just hope that God will let it all be. Thank you guys if you guys really did watch all this. And I hope that this touched at least one person. Because if one person wants to change their life or seek God because of they seen this video, then this hour that I spent recording all this sitting here is completely worth it. And I promise, if you seek God with all your heart, you will not be turned down. You will not say no. He will pick you up out of any situation that you're in right now. I've been through a good handful of things in my life, so I know firsthand that God is good. He is able to bring you through anything in your life. He will never let go, even when I don't know the saying. Like I said, I tried saying it earlier. I don't know the saying. When you can't trace the speed moving, you can always trust his heart. Something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. Just trust God, love Him, give Him a chance. And if you have any more questions about my testimony, feel free to ask me because I'm always open for discussion. You guys can message me on here. You can hold me through my YouTube, my Facebook. My name is Johnny Merryman. Really easy to find. I'm a dude with the big gauges, the nose piercing, the snake bites, and a tattoo on my chest that explains my life. Hopefully, Ephesians 2:8 through 9. For it is by grace we are saved, not by works, so that no man can boast. That's not completely correct, but that's the basis of it. Uh, Everybody has their chance to just be saved through grace. If you have saving faith, if you were baptized, you have a chance. I'm going to end this video now, but I thank every single one of you for giving me a chance to talk. I really hope somebody watches this, because if not, it's a complete waste of my life. I love you all. God bless you all.